Hey guys, welcome to the bench. Today we'll be building a racing drone. The frame we've chosen today is the Floss by Pyroflip RC. This is an all-around great frame for anyone looking to get into racing or to upgrade your current frame. The components of today's build will feature the Betaflight all-in-one F3 board, iFly Spectrum, so we'll be using the FPV Racing serial receiver with autobind. We'll be installing a RunCam micro, so we'll need some special ordered 3D printed mounts. Our VTX will be the TBS Unify Pro HV Race. We'll be running the 30 amp Emax Bullet ESCs. And the motors we've gone with are the 2204 2522 kV Floss series motors from Hyperlite. Alright, and we have our frame itself, the Hyperfloss. Let's go ahead and open it up and take a look. Now he did include a 3D printed mount for an FPV camera. It fits the RunCam Mini perfectly. It'll fit a standard FPV camera as well. Might be a little snug. If you want to use the RunCam Micro, you will have to special order these mounts. I'll get a link in the description below. There's two different size standoffs. Taller one goes to the back, shorter two go up front. We have some longer 25mm screws. It's going to be used to secure the stack. You can go shorter if you want to, especially if you're using an all-in-one flight controller like we are today. There's a couple different size nylon nuts. There's some aluminum flange nuts and some that aren't. You want to separate those out. If you order from Pyro Drone RC, you will get this top plate, and I think if you order from somewhere else, you may not get that. And then the VTX antenna bracket. Alright, so step one is to get the motors on the arms. We're just going to use the screws that came in the motor box. Everybody sends you 4. You could use 2 if you want. A little bit of blue Loctite. Don't use red. Red will mess your day up. Just grab yourself a little piece of plastic. Just a little dab of blue Loctite is all you need. Doesn't take a lot. After you've got your 4 screws in, you're going to want to check the inside diameter of the motor. You don't want that C-clip to be unbalanced or uneven. You want the shaft to be perfectly center. I like to use a C-clip as just a little bit of a reference, so get it as close as you can. Okay, on to step 2. Let's grab 2 of the front standoffs, 2 of the 25mm screws, 2 of the 15mm screws, 4 of our 12mm screws. We're going to need those newly assembled arms and motors, our flanged aluminum nuts, and our bottom plate. Alright, let's grab our bottom plate. The 12mm screws are going to be used for the outside holes. Let's go ahead and pop one through and grab the arm. It needs to be slotted through on the second hole. Just line it up there. Use the flange nuts. Just kind of secure that down. It doesn't need to be real tight. We still have to move it. Then we're going to grab the 2 front standoffs and then 2 of the 15mm screws and the 2 25mm screws and the 2 non-flange nuts going to be used to secure the back. The 25mm screws and the nylon standoffs will go in the middle holes on the frame. That's going to be the posts for your flight controller. It's going to sit like so, and the camera mounts are going to go over the front aluminum standoffs. Make sure that flat edge is on the inside. All right, and let's go ahead and look at the underside of the Betaflight board. This is an all-in-one flight controller, so it has a PDB built in. You see the ESC pads here. We're going to go ahead and solder the wire first, which means we need to desolder the leads from the ESCs, because we're going to solder the ESC leads directly to the PDB on the board first. I'm using XT60 and 14 gauge wire for my battery lead. You could use thicker if you want. 12 gauge is fine. For this build, 14 gauge works, so it's a little bit more flexible. I'm using a Spectrum satellite which pulls 3.3 volts. To get that voltage correct, we're going to jump those top two pads there. If you're using FreeSky, there's a 5 volt jumper on the bottom, so solder that one instead if you're using FreeSky. Our TBS Unify Pro HV can take voltage up to, I think, 36 volts. So it's, if we're running 4 cell, we just need to jump these two pads there. It's going to tell it to just route voltage from the battery. And the bottom is for 5 volts. So if you're using a VTX with 5 volts, use that instead. And then this top rail here is for our OSD. So feed your video in and out to that. We'll show you how to do that here in a little bit. Let's get to work on desoldering the ESC leads. Alright, let's go ahead and get some solder down on our Betaflight board. If you have a little piece of masking tape, it makes a great way to secure that board while you work. So what we're doing here is pre-tinning these pads, getting them ready for the ESC leads. This is our positive pad for our battery lead. The negative is on the other side. Now let's take a look at the jumper for our receiver and our VTX. So let's jump these top two pads together. That's going to provide 3.3 volts, and these top two pads will provide battery voltage for our VTX. I like to pre-tin here. There's a couple different ways of soldering directly to a board, but I pre-tin first. And then this bottom rail here, let's hit that. That's for our receiver. Now we're going to prep our wires to attach to our board, and these are the old ESC leads that we pulled off earlier. If you don't have any helping hands, a great way to secure them while you work, just a little rubber band, wrap them around the end of the pliers, does a really nice job. Yeah, so just a little bit of solder, get you a nice pre-tin on the wires, and get them ready to go. Now we're going to prep our battery lead. Don't cut off more than you need. Keep it nice and short. And I like to go about 70 millimeters, 2.5 to 3.5 inches makes a perfect battery lead on these racing drones. Alright, and on this Betaflight board, I like to get my small electronics leads prepped beforehand and soldered to the board before the install. So let's go ahead and grab the leads to our electronics. And for the spectrum lead, just kind of fold it in half and cut it down the middle. It's going to give us the appropriate length for that. For our camera lead, I want just a little bit more than half. So fold it in half and give it a half an inch or so. And our VTX lead, these are the power leads to the VTX, and leave those just a little bit longer than these next leads. We want to keep them separated from the power, the 5 volts that will supply our camera, which is that red wire. That yellow wire is our video lead, and that white is for audio, which will connect to the TX3 UART for TBS Smart Audio. Okay, go ahead and strip just a little bit off, and grab you some handy dandy pliers and pre-tin the ends of the leads. Try to keep these nice and clean, because we're going to, the cleaner we keep them here, the cleaner our board is going to look at the end. Alright, this spectrum lead is not silicone wire, so I'll strip off a little bit more than I did for the other leads, and I'm going to go ahead and trim those back. Okay, so I've reconnected the lead here for our VTX. This 7 to 36 volts going out is actually power going into the VTX. Don't get that confused with this 5 volt going out to the camera. You want to make sure that I kept my leads just a little bit longer, so I didn't get that confused. And this yellow wire here is our video going out. It's going down to our goggles, so that's the spot there on the Betaflight board that we soldered that into. This white is our audio lead, and we're going to connect that to the TX3 port on the board. So our camera lead here, we're going to connect our ground and our power from the VTX to the camera lead, and it's going to supply the camera with 5 volts. And now we're going to go ahead and solder this VTX lead to the actual board. Again, don't make the mistake of soldering your power in to power out, or vice versa, okay? Alright, so the cleanest way to get this one done is to start with the ground and kind of work your way in. So that ground is that very first pad there, and we're soldering directly to the board. So the best way to do that, since we pre-tinned, is to just hit it with a little bit of heat and push the wire in. You should have a nice clean joint there. You're not really going on top of the pad, you're going into the actual hole. So kind of repeat the process with the power and then our video. All right, now we're going to take the 5 volt out and the ground, and we're going to connect that to our RunCam Micro. So go ahead and grab the camera lead. Let's get the video signal that's going in. Let's get that soldered up to the right spot. So the V in is the video signal from your camera lead. And now we're just going to connect the 5 volt out from our VTX directly to the camera lead. And this part's pretty simple. Just going to pre-tin both sides, both ends. The heat shrink I have here is a little bit too big, but it'll work. So after the ends were pre-tinned a little bit earlier, and just kind of tap it there with the tip of the iron. Pull it just a little bit, make sure it's not a cold solder joint. Good to go. And just kind of zap the heat shrink with the heat gun and call it a day. Alright, now grab your receiver lead. This is the same process for FreeSky or Spectrum, using the same pads. Same process as our VTX. We'll start at the edge. That end is ground, the middle is power, and that's supplying 3.3 volts. If you have a little bit of trouble, just apply a little bit more solder. Makes it a little bit easier to kind of get in there. And there we go. Our electronics are ready to be plugged in. Okay, and next we're going to decase our SpecSat receiver. So there's a couple screws on the back side that you'll need to take out. Oddly enough, the tools to do this are found in a iPhone repair kit, which is what I'm using here. It's a little pry tool. Be careful because there's some sticky tape on the underside of the receiver. Just be gentle with it, you'll be fine. And you could use double-sided tape if you want. I like to use a little bit of heat shrink. Just kind of protects a little bit, makes it nice and clean. So if you want to use tape, that's fine, or heat shrink. Okay, I've went ahead and plugged in all of our electronics, and we're going to go over things real quick. So we have our spec set here, and it is getting 3.3 volts. Our camera lead, which is getting its power from the TBS Unify Pro, and video coming in from the camera and out to the VTX. And it's getting its battery voltage, it's getting its voltage from the battery. And last we have our audio coming out from the TBS Unify Pro, and again that's going to TX3. It's on this rail down here on the bottom of the board. Okay, and go ahead and grab our power leads. We can start with our battery lead, our ESC leads. We're going to get these soldered onto the underside of the Betaflight board. So this process is definitely made easier by some good solder and a nice soldering iron. And this is going to be one of those things that you want to double check your work. Make sure that you've got your polarity correct. Sometimes you can get in a hurry and mess one of these wires up, and it'll ruin your build. And we don't want that. Okay, ESC leads are done. Let's take a look at the other side of the board. We're going to be soldering our audio from the TBS Unify Pro to TX3, which is right here. And our negative battery lead to the ground pad. Our motor wires coming in from the ESCs. Okay, so let's tin our ground pad for our battery lead. And go ahead and connect that to the board. And for our TBS Smart Audio, it's the same process as before. Pre-tin the hole on the TX3 spot on the board. And the cleanest way to do it, in my opinion, is to solder, apply heat to the board, to the solder bubble, and just gently push the wire in. Okay, and let's pre-tin our pads for our ESCs. So we have signal and ground. Before we drop the board in place, let's check out the orientation. So the camera leads will be facing the front. Our VTX leads will be facing the back with the battery leads. Our receiver leads just going to fold over the side. This orientation is important because our motors need to be in the right spot for motor 1, motor 2, etc. So we want to go ahead and drop the board in, tuck the wires underneath the board, and make sure that this is the orientation that you have your board in. Alright, once you have that dropped in place, go ahead and tighten it down with a couple of your nylon nuts, and let's get ready to install our ESCs. So a little bit of blue masking tape again here, just kind of holds it in place for us while we solder. So on this frame, it's a little bit thicker towards the edge, so you want to snug those ESCs up pretty close to the nuts. And I like to get the ESC down. I trim the wires just past the middle of the solder bubble. Makes for a pretty clean install. There's no slack in the wires, and you don't want to trim off too much. Just 1 or 2 millimeters is all you really need. We're going to pre-tin our ESC leads. And just double check the polarity on your ESCs and get them soldered in. Okay, and just repeat that process for all 4 ESCs. And then we're going to attach our signal and ground wires to the Betaflight board. Your build kind of looks like a giant spaghetti monster, and that's okay. We're going to go ahead and grab some of our heat shrink and trim off 3 or 4 millimeters. If you use the heat shrink that comes in the packaging on these bullets, it's a little bit too long to comfortably install. So just slide it over, and don't forget this part. You may get angry if you have to go back to add your heat shrink. So we have just enough room to solder our motor leads to our ESC. And the way I like to do my builds is just go straight across. So just bring them straight. I don't cross. I don't do my motor direction here. I do it in the BLHeli suite, which we'll do in a setup build video. Okay, and we're going to repeat that process 3 more times for the other 3 ESCs. If you have this top plate here, if you bought your kit from Pyrozone, I like to get that top plate on there, and I've got my receiver wire and my VTX wire pulled out the back underneath the top plate, and our camera lead pointing towards the front, and everything is ready to be installed and plugged in. So go ahead and get your electronics plugged in, and I'll show you how I like to install my small electronics. Okay, I like to have my receiver antenna leads pointing towards the back. I like to zip tie those to the arms either with a little bit of tubing. For my VTX, I pop a little bit of sticky tape, double-sided sticky tape, and mount that to the underside of my top plate. My VTX bracket goes on that top stack screw, like so. So I've got my RunCam micro mounted in, and you want to check and make sure that it has plenty of current clearance to move up and down to get whatever desired camera angle. Alright, and go ahead and get that back standoff screwed in, and we're going to mount our VTX. So just a little bit of double-sided sticky tape cut to size for the top plate is how I like to mount that. It's a fairly tight fit if you're using the same configuration. Just kind of move that around until you're happy with the fit. And if you've installed the bracket like I have here, you have plenty of clearance for that little connector, so there's not going to be any stress in a crash. Alright, so now that we've assembled our drone, the last step we're going to do is check it for shorts. We're going to use a voltage tester and get it on a setting that is going to test for continuity. And you're going to just hit it on both the positive and the negative, and you want it to be traveling up to infinity, or at least going up. Sometimes they beep if there's a short. If there's no beep and it's going upwards, or at least not going down, you're good to go. Alright, and I wanted to just kind of hit on why we chose this build as our first build video, and why I would recommend it to someone just getting into racing. The idea behind this is the lighter your quad, the lighter, the less mass it's carrying into each turn, the easier it's going to be to fly. It's going to make for a little bit better flying experience. It's going to turn a good pilot and give him just a little bit more control. It's going to turn an inexperienced pilot and kind of get him comfortable just a little bit quicker. And that's kind of been our experience with these super lightweight builds. This particular frame is very durable, especially when you keep it, below 240 grams dry. The less mass you're carrying into a crash, the less force is applied to the weak spots. So yes, you're still going to break stuff when you crash, but that's no different than any other quad that you're out there smashing into stuff. So just a couple things to keep in mind, some food for thought. Alright guys, and this concludes our build video of the Hyperlight Floss by Pyroflip RC. If you enjoyed what you saw today, hit that like and subscribe button. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. We'll have a complete list of parts and where we purchased everything in the description of the video. Thanks again for watching, guys. Stay tuned for part 2 of the racing drone build. We're going to go over how to set up your flight controller using the Betaflight software. We're also going to go over how to tune your quad and set PID adjustments using the TBS Unify Smart Audio through the OSD on the goggles. So that'll be coming up in part 2.